You can see me.
You're muted, Sasha.
Would help if I took the mute button off. Good afternoon, everyone. Apologies for us starting a little bit late. We've got a bit of a technological crisis happening in that Ryan, who is today presenting to us, cannot see or cannot hear us. So he is going to be doing the presentation to you a bit blind, and I will be doing my best to facilitate questions afterwards through the sidebar to him. So it's a bit of a suck and see, I'm afraid, but we will not be deterred. So as I say, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the virtual 2021 Evidence-Based Policing Conference. My name is Sasha Hatchett. I am the Assistant Chief Constable in North Wales Police, and I'm also the Welsh Police Force Lead for Evidence-Based Policing. I have the pleasure of being your facilitator this afternoon at this very exciting topical webinar titled Targeting Missing Persons Most Likely to Come to Harm. Clearly, missing people, and particularly missing people in crisis, is a real challenge, a real area of risk for police forces, and it is my great pleasure to introduce Superintendent Ryan Doyle from Devon and Cornwall Police, who is keen to share some of the important research he's done over the past couple of years with you, alongside the Cambridge University for this area of policing. Whilst his day job is Head of Criminal Justice and Custody, I don't know if many of you know, there's a little thing called the G7 happening in Cornwall in June. And as a result of that, as an experienced ops commander, he is currently part of that team planning for its safe delivery. No pressure, Ryan. Ryan has worked in both Thames Valley Police and Devon and Cornwall Police, but may also be known to you for his role in creating Local Heroes, a charity that has worked with the Premier League football clubs and a host of athletes and TV stars to inspire young people into social action that celebrates diversity and promotes inclusion. So he is no stranger to presenting. However, even I think this is going to be a challenge for him this afternoon. Before I hand over to Ryan, I just wanted to outline how we anticipate the session will run. Not quite as planned. I'm going to hand over, and I've got someone in the background to indicate to Ryan when he's ready to start his presentation, and I've got somebody else who's running through the slides for him. So it's a bit of a three-way thing. Yes, it can go wrong, but we're going to do our best because he's got a lot of good stuff to tell us. Please remember that this is one of a number, so it's number 5 out of 10 sessions that is being delivered through virtual evidence-based policing conference. They're happening every Wednesday. If you haven't managed to jump on one before, then you can always go and have a look at the podcasts in relation to them. They're not all about operational policing issues. There's something there for everyone, and a really, really good speeches by individuals and some really good presentations around some research that's being done and is being delivered for you to hopefully take away and see what you need to do with it. So, as I say, welcome, and I shall, hopefully, without further ado, pass you over to Ryan.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. So I say thank you very much for the introduction, Mum. I didn't hear it. I'm having some real technical difficulties, so hopefully everybody can see and hear me. I can see comments as they come up, though, so thank you very much. Today's presentation is based on my research I did as part of my master's around missing people and the risk assessment process for MISPers. So the presentation is called Targeting Missing Persons Most Likely to Come to Harm, and that targeting is based on our 3 T's from evidence-based policing. So it was about taking an evidence-based approach to the risk assessment of MISPers, and then aligning our resources, policing resources, to dealing with reports and finding missing people. So if we can go to slide 1, please. which looks at the context. So from a national context, personally, I think the biggest threat to the police service's legitimacy, that is across a whole range of things at the moment that have been very well publicised for some time in the news. And a part of that legitimacy for me is the trust and confidence of the public for us to effectively use our resources, and their trust and confidence in our ability to keep people safe. And missing people form a big part of that, in my view. For Devon and Cornwall, missing people account for up to 15% of our daily demand. It is a huge area of business for us. We are a force that has been safeguarding and vulnerability focused as part of our force mission for some time, and missing people are a key part of that safeguarding. We have huge swathes of coastline, of moorlands. We have high numbers of elderly residents, care homes, both elderly and children's homes as well. So, and we also experience a number of people that travel down from other parts of the country to Devon and Cornwall. And then are reported missing. So from outside of our force area, reported missing in our force area. So missing people is big business. It's a high demand area for Devon and Cornwall Police. And actually personal context, which I think is important whenever we do anything like this, is I wanted my research, my master's research, to add value to service, to add to the growing bank of evidence-based research and evidence that exists within policing. I didn't want to write an 18,000 word doorstop, so missing people felt like the right place to go. So slide 3 then, please, Suzanne. So what did I do? It was a retrospective analysis of all missing person records that were contained on our compact system from 2008, when we first started using compact, up until 2019, when I did this research. That was over 92,500 records. That's important for two reasons. One, it meant that the style of research I was able to do, which we'll talk about in a minute around odds ratios, we had in a number of areas some high confidence in terms of those results, because we were using so many records. But it also did come with some limitations. So when you do a piece of research using that number of records, you are scratching the surface. So when I talk about limitations and next steps at the end of the presentation, the caveat around it is this is the start. This is not giving all the answers, because when you look at 92,500 records, you don't have time to really go into the detail of the individuals within there. What I wanted to look at was the predictive associations between binary predictors gained from the compact risk factors known at the time of report. So we're talking age, gender, whether or not the missing person was in care, whether they had a disability, whether they were suicidal at the time of missing, whether there were previous reports. So a number of risk factors and identifiers that are descriptors that are recorded in compact and are known to us at the time of missing. And what I wanted to know is the relationship between those and harmful outcomes in our missing person cases. And I did that using, as I said, using odds ratios. When we talk about harm, all harm was aggregated. So again, within compact, there are a number of harm categories, right from deceased all the way through. We have sexual harm, emotional harm, physical harm, and to all of those are aggregated together. So when we talk about a harmful outcome, they may have died, they may have suffered emotional harm or other physical harm. What that gave me is a higher percentage of individuals that came to harm and a better chance of looking at harmful outcomes. And again, when we talk about limitations actually or next steps, you could go further and look at, actually, we are going to look at these descriptors and risk factors and their relationship to MISPers who die whilst they're missing, or MISPers who suffer sexual harm while they're missing, to give a richer picture of that risk assessment process. The other thing I did, and I'll explain why as we move through the slides, is the sample was divided into subcategories, so into gender and age categories, to enable that separate analysis of predictive associations. And as I said, I'll explain why in a minute. The age categories I chose, I went for under 18, so our juveniles, 18 to 64 as adults, and then 65 and over, age of state pension, to see if there was a difference between adults and those who are over 65. The reason I wanted to do this is that our current risk assessment process in policing is subjective. It is a series of questions that are asked at the time of this person, and then an opinion based on experience, based on knowledge of the person taking the report, as to whether or not that missing person is high, medium, or low. And when we talk about high, medium, low, we are talking about the likelihood of them coming to harm. So APP will say that is that there a high risk of that person likely to come to serious harm, a medium risk of that person likely to come to some harm, or a low risk of that person coming to harm. And the ethos, the conversations we've been having in our master's cohort and through evidence-based policing research is there a better way? Is there a more accurate way? Is there an evidence base to those decisions we're making? And the evidence base around missing person risk assessments is very subjective, and it's based on that individual or the person around them. So you may have a really experienced officer take that initial call. You may have a brand new officer take that call, and it felt to me like there was a better way. There was an opportunity for us to provide our colleagues, to provide those people taking missing people reports, the ability to make more informed, evidence-based decisions on the likelihood of someone coming to harm. And the purpose of this research was to find out if that was possible, if we could be more accurate, if we could increase that confidence that the public have in us keeping people safe, if we can enhance our legitimacy further as a service. So the findings, I'll start with the findings, and then I'll talk about the odds ratios and how I got to those findings. So of the just over 92,500 missing people that were part of this study, gender split was fairly even, 54% male, 46% female. The importance from a diversity and inclusivity point of view is that for the purposes of this study, gender was seen as a binary issue. There is a different conversation around gender and gender not being a binary issue. For the purposes of this research and the ability to create odds ratios, it was done as such. So it hasn't taken into account trans, because within Compact, some people are recorded as transgender, some people are recorded as male who is a trans male, and it is not clear. The data was not clear enough for me to be able to do a more holistic view of gender in terms of risk assessment. So that is absolutely something that should be considered in the future. 59% of our missing people are juveniles, 35% adults in the 18 to 64 category, and 6% over 65. Of all those missing people, of 92,500 missing people, under 3,500 came to harm. So 3.8% of our missing people came to harm. And as I said, that's aggregated harm. That's any type of harm at all. 1.7% of juveniles come to harm, and it's 6.8% of adults that come to harm. And then a higher percentage of juvenile female missing people came to harm than juvenile males. so 2.1% female compared to 1.2% male. Into the next slide, you see it's a higher percentage of adult females that come to harm than adult males. But then when you move into the over 65 category, it's a high percentage of males that come to harm than females. Of those that do come to harm, 3% of all low risk missing people come to harm, 5% of all medium risk missing people come to harm, and 14% of all high risk missing people came to harm. And these are the next stats are the ones that really spiked my interest in terms of MISPA gradings, which I touched on towards the end, which is 84% of the juveniles that came to harm had originally been assessed as medium risk. Into the next slide, 43% of adults that came to harm, medium risk, 31% of over 65 that came to harm were originally medium risk. So this, for me, there was something around that medium risk category. Who is in there and what do we mean by likelihood of harm? This is, for me, the key finding. The predictive value of those risk factors is conditional on age and gender. And then finally, the current risk assessment process is less accurate for forecasting outcomes than simply assuming no missing person will ever come to harm. And I'll explain more about that later. So these charts here show which missing people come to harm and the percentage. So the blue bars are those MISPers that don't come to harm. And you can see it is a very, very small portion. So I've already said it's 3.8% overall. Actually, for juveniles, juvenile males, 1%. So up to 7% adult females. So there is the age and gender is really important, not just in predictive values, but also in terms of who actually comes to harm as well. So these are the odds ratios. What this tells us is the likelihood or the increased likelihood of someone coming to harm depending on not on a certain factor. So the longer the bar chart, so we're on slide 8 now, sorry, Suzanne. The longer the bar, the higher the number, the increased odds of somebody coming to harm. If it is over 1, that means that there is an increased odds of that outcome. So for this, it's harm. If it is under 1, it means that there is less chance, so what we would refer to as a protective factor. So when I ran the odds ratios for all 92,500 missing people, it showed that the risk factor that creates the highest odds of someone coming to harm is being visually impaired. However, and this is the health warning on some of these calculations, the number of individuals out of my 92,000, only 94 were recorded as being visually impaired. So that skews the ratio and lowers the credibility of that. But if you look at some of the bigger numbers, mental illness, no repeats, so being in care or not in care, disabilities, gender, when you get into numbers where you are into thousands, tens of thousands, that gives you some really strong confidence on and some significant that statistical significance on those odds ratios. So we move down to suicidal. Unsurprisingly, if a MISPer is suicidal at the time of the report, that increases the odds of a harmful outcome. If there is mental illness present as a risk factor, that increases the odds of them coming to harm. Disability. The one that really jumped out at me though at this point, and this is what prompted my splitting the total cohort into those subcategories around age and gender, was the issue of no repeat and not in care. So for all 92,500 MISPers taken as one group, not being a first-time MISPer and being someone who's not missing from care increases the odds of you coming to harm. However, if you are according to this, in care or a repeat misper, those odds are under 1, and therefore they're a protective factor. So what that suggests is that if you're a repeat missing person or you're missing from care, you're less likely to come to harm, which I wanted to question. I wasn't sure how, if I'm honest, I was a bit cynical about that number, how that's possible. And I thought actually that needs to be investigated a little bit further, which is why the decision was then made to look at these subgroups. So if we move to slide 9, this is where we look at the odds ratios for juvenile mispers. The orange is our females and the blue is our males. And actually, this shows the opposite of what we discovered for our entire group. And it shows that for juveniles, missing from care increases the chances of somebody coming to harm. Being a repeat at the bottom there, a repeat juvenile misper, that increases the odds of them coming to harm. And then, as we've said, the obvious ones previously, suicidal, mental illness, as you would expect, CSE risk. If those risk factors are present for a juvenile, that increases the odds of them coming to harm. And for females, it is higher all the way through, some even more so than others. But our juvenile females are far more at risk of coming to harm than juvenile males are. If we go to slide 10, please, Suzanne, you can see for adult mispers, there is a change. So that missing from care drops below 1 for males and females, and therefore is what you would refer to as a protective factor. Missing from care for adults is not does not throw out that predictive association with harmful outcomes. Suicidal absolutely does, as you would expect. For me, though, for adults, the really interesting outcome from these odds ratios was around first time and repeat missing people. So a repeat for females, being a repeat missing person increases the odds of them coming to harm, whereas for males, being a first time misper increases the odds of someone coming to harm, of that misper coming to harm. So where from in care and repeat showed that actually it is juveniles compared to adults, and it was worth doing that age category split. What this shows is actually that gender split is also impactive on predictors around that no repeat and repeat. And into slide 11, please, which is our over 65s. So this is the first time that actually being male increases the odds of someone coming to harm. Being a first time misper for male and female increases the likelihood of a harmful outcome as opposed to being a repeat. And when we talked about limitations at the start, and small group numbers on those predictors that we talked about at the very start of these odds ratios, that is clear for most of these categories for the over 65s. So we move into a much smaller cohort of people, and that skews odds ratios quite severely. So for all of the mispers, only a few thousand of them were over 65, and only 3 of those were shown as suicidal. So that means the odds ratio for suicidal over 65 becomes 27.65, which is we can't have any confidence in that because the numbers are so small. And I'll touch on at the end in terms of next steps on something that could be done potentially around that. So, so moving to discussion and recommendations that are presented at the end of the research, and I'll just highlight these, and then we'll open up for questions and comments, and I wanted to make sure we had time to discuss this through, because those really clear. So my view is, and there's some statements here for discussion, that the risk assessment process for missing people moving forward should be specific to the age and gender of the MISPER. So rather than having one risk assessment process for all missing people, actually we should consider having 6 different risk assessment, one for male and female for each of the different categories, but where those odds ratios have shown that certain risk factors increase the odds of harm for juvenile females or for male adults, but not for other areas, then my view is a better way of doing a risk assessment process is making it more bespoke to the age and gender of the missing person. The other thing I think should be explored is the risk grading titles and the bands that we put missing people in. So of the in short, I think medium risk is too much of a catch-all and is too vague, both in terms of its descriptor in APP, but also in the way that we police that. So of all of our missing people in Devon and Cornwall during this study, 75% of them were medium risk. Actually, of those 90 across the entirety, 97.4% of them didn't come to harm. And actually that goes up for juveniles. It's 98% of medium risk juveniles don't come to harm. 95% of adults who are medium risk don't come to harm. So with high risk, whilst there is a very good argument to say that actually the reason that more high risk MISPers don't come to harm is because we put things in place to go and find them as quickly as we can, and we prevent harm in high risk MISPers, which I think is a very strong argument. I totally agree with. Actually, I'm not sure the same can be said for medium risk MISPers. Because in this study, that's over 67,000 missing people, and I think the policing response to medium risk missing people is probably not consistent, if we're really honest with ourselves. And so what we're saying is we're putting 75% of our MISPers into a category where actually 98.5% of them are going to come to harm anyway. But we said that they may or may not come to harm. So I think there is a using an evidence base, relooking at our risk assessment process. I think we could create something that gives us far more accuracy with far more clearly defined boundaries for those risk categories, which would allow us to target our resources far more effectively, keep people safe far more effectively, in a far more considered way than we are now. So, and the last bit was around those odds ratios. The calculations give a strong indicator, but actually, what I recommend, I've had conversations with colleagues in other forces already looking to replicate this. Actually, I think any new model should probably be built on something more sophisticated as a predictor, such as random forests. So we can really get into those smaller numbers and understand just how likely they are from there. So that is that's the research. That's what I learned. There are, in terms of next steps, absolutely delighted for other people to pick this up. I think running these numbers again through different models and trying out different models until we can find something more accurate, whether that lands as a decision supporting matrix for officers making those decisions, but if we can get to a place where we have a more bespoke risk assessment process based on the real likelihood of someone coming to harm based on predictors. That means that we can assign resources in a more accurate and targeted way. I think that, as I said, will go even further to increasing our legitimacy and the trust and confidence the public have in us keeping people safe. Thank you very much. Questions, please. Mum, I can see you. So obviously it's started working. Can I hear you though?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you as well.
Oh, right. So I'm just going to cut the phone call I was putting through to you. So we're.
So I've hung up on you. Sorry.
Thank you. Thanks for that, Ryan. So a massive amount of work that's gone in there, a lot of research and a lot of documents that's been looked at. And you picked up that ability to replicate. I think so. The first question that we've had is from Anna, and I think you did touch on this slightly, but does the risk assessment, the low, medium and high, also take into account whether any measures were taken to search for the missing persons?
No, that's hi Annalena, how are you? No, it doesn't. So that risk assessment is based on the present risk factors at the time they've gone. Whether or not anybody's actually done any searching yet can come into the conversation piece and the investigative questioning, but it's not a risk factor in itself. Okay.
Right. Our next one, Dixie Dean. One significant issue is that the initial response requires quick and dirty. I think that's supposed to be risk assessment, which particularly informs the deployment response.
Yeah.
So
more detailed risk assessment can be made in light of any additional information. Yeah, totally agree. So actually, what we really don't want to be doing is if somebody's phoning up to report a high risk missing person, someone said they're going to kill themselves, they've gone off in their car, they've gone now. The last thing we want is for them to be sat on the officers to be sat on the phone for half an hour completing a 50-page risk assessment. I totally get that. What I'm suggesting is what I think we could do is if we think about those risk assessments being specific to the age and gender of the MISPER, you can order your questions accordingly. So actually, the first two questions should be how old are they, what's their gender. That then takes you into actually what are the first 3 questions or 5 questions that can tell us if somebody is a high risk. So actually, they are a juvenile female, right? Are they missing from care? Have they been missing before? Are they suicidal? Substances, mental illness, that that you get that quite quick indication then, can't you, of whether or not they're high, medium or low, and then you can delve in deeper, as you said later on. But totally agree, Dixie, the last thing you want to be doing is sitting there for too long taking a risk assessment that's going to lead to someone actually coming to harm whilst you're risk assessing that harm.
Okay, so Andrew's got one. Was there any research done into the quality of the initial call handling, which forms a major part of the initial risk factors? Similarly, any research into the quality of supervisory reviews? Really topical.
Thank you. So not as part of my study. Some of that work has been done before. So Dr. Shayla Green from Portsmouth University has looked at the confidence within supervisors in the work they check. It also links to, and this was a challenge that was put my way from an officer around the harmful outcomes. So this relies on good reporting of harm as well. So if we want to know actually did someone come to emotional harm or physical harm, we need to know that actually they've been honest telling us about the harm. We've recorded that harm appropriately in that previous assessment. So this is purely based on what is in compact at the time. The qualitative part around the taking of the report or the reporting of the harmful outcomes didn't feature as part of this research.
Okay. Ryan.
Yeah.
So a big chunk of yours is around, I suppose, that medium category.
Yeah.
Because that's where we've probably got more concerns, haven't we? That the
absolutely
been high, should have been. So I guess what could also be an indicator is initial reporting straight to high, and then a separate set of questions within the medium, the ones which, so when we talk about supervisory review, being able to maybe chunk up some of that to say, well, have we missed something here? So rather than maybe the initial response where we might say, right, from the off, we're looking at this as a high, medium and low, when they fit into that medium category, then the additional scrutiny around that just to confirm the mediums are right, because probably a lot of ours do fit into that medium category.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So I think it's the RNLI or the Coast Guard have, rather than having high, medium risk for people they're looking for, they do it within a time frame. So like we would do for call handlers, immediate, routine, priority type thing. So they work it on actually how quickly do we find this person, as opposed to our APP approach, which is the likelihood of them coming to harm. My concern is, and it could be said around DA as well, which is, I know why Kent Police looked at different DA categories around harm, is medium just feels like too much of a catch-all. We know we know about the highs and we know about the lows, and it just 75% in this category in the middle, when and it'll be the same for all forces, but I think the response to those medium risk is going to be slightly different to if it's, you know, Plymouth city centre on a Saturday night or rural North Devon on a Monday morning. And I think that will probably feel the same for a lot of other forces. It's a very, very wide category, doesn't feel particularly targeted. And what are we missing there?
So Alistair's got one. So Stevenson's work raises the point that families often feel that their experience regarding risk assessments are ignored. How do you see the enhanced process drawing the family assessment into the police assessment at initial report?
Really good question. So I've mentioned it around a decision supporting matrix. So as a public order commander, if I'm asked to assess the risk around a public order event, it's not an algorithm that tells me definitely this is what the risk of the event is. It is a process that I'll go through, and then it will give me a score, and it says if it's between this band and this band, it's high, medium. But there is an opportunity for that informed assessment, either looking at the intel from my own command experience to match with that decision supporting matrix. And I would suggest that as a route forward, we shouldn't completely ignore the experience of officers, or indeed the experience and the assessment of families in terms when we determine that. So I think a really good evidence-based holistic risk assessment should take into account the odds based on empirical evidence and, you know, strong data around what risk factors are likely to come to harm, but also take into account that information and intelligence that we would use, whether we're, you know, assessing a public order event, a domestic, or indeed a missing person. So I don't think the two are exclusive. I think there is an opportunity to bring both together.
So Dixie's raised, is there currently any move within the police to develop a risk assessment along the lines you've proposed, or on any other basis?
Yes, hopefully. I've had conversations with my chief, Sean Sawyer, around this, around some work we'd like to try and do in force to develop that. I've spoken to colleagues in other forces who have read the article, made contact and said actually it kind of rings with them as well, and so they'd like to look at it. So I think there's a group of us post. We're a little bit busy at the moment. We've got a party in June to plan for, and then I think half the country will be here on holiday this summer. But I'm hoping in the autumn to get together with colleagues, and indeed, you know, the offer is if there is anybody online today that would like to replicate or look at this in their own forces, start some conversations in the autumn around actually how can we take this further and start to develop that risk assessment.
I think that's really important, because we all know about having the ability to replicate things. So if it's replicable, then it adds value, it adds weight.
Absolutely.
To it. So, you know, there is every bit of change starts with an initial piece of research, doesn't it? But if we find it consistently, then it's then a discussion to be had with the MPCC lead and the college. Absolutely. To say, you know, actually, have we got this right? Or is there other stuff that we might want to look at just to make it a little bit better? Because we're all about continuous improvement, aren't we? You know, so.
Absolutely, Mum. And this, there is no part of this research in any of it that says this is the way we should do it. In terms of here's the new risk assessment, my way's the way to do it. What this says is actually there's some questions here I think we can do better, and let's take that further and see how we can do it better.
There is something in your report, Ryan, which I suppose when we look at policing, we don't police in isolation anymore, do we? We need our partners for everything that we do. And there are some indicators around the care sector, especially for over 65s. So I just wonder what conversations may be had from a partnership perspective to share maybe. And as I say, it's too early when you just do one piece of research, and it does need to be replicable. But at some point in time, there's possibly a discussion to be had around what, I suppose, safeguarding could be put in place for people who go into care, and risk factors that may need to be highlighted to police in the event that people go missing, to add to that, that risk assessment. Yeah,
no, totally agree. And that might be for adults or people with illness or juveniles, that partnership approach to preventing people going missing, recognizing triggers, and how we feed that in and how we work together. That's really, really key. Totally agree.
So Nick's got a question. Have you seen any evidence of categories of missing persons, any discernible trends in terms of background and outcomes, i.e. looked after children, hospital patient, domestic victims, etc.?
So there is research out there that looks at that. Forgive me, I can't off the top of my head quote any of the authors. There was some of it looked at in my lit review. It wasn't done for this. This was a data analysis of a huge amount of records. Domestic was something that regrettably I had hoped to include in this but couldn't. So Compact uses domestic victim as a risk factor. For some reason, none of that was ticked in the records that I had, which was so I don't know whether it's contained in Compact and has just not been switched on for our force. But unfortunately, that data wasn't available for the odds ratio. It would have been really, really good to look at. So we've got age, we've got missing from care, and we've got some of the illness and disability stuff. But absolutely, there's further to go. Like we said, this is replication, keep building, build up that as a collective, how we build up that knowledge bank.
And Nick, that's a really good point around hospital patients, because we all know that presents a risk, and often that presents a risk around suicide, doesn't it? So it really, so it would be a great thing to look at. Okay. Now I'm going to get the name wrong, aren't I? But Owen, is the search urgency determined at the same time as the risk of harm?
So yes, it is. If somebody is a high risk missing person, that would be an immediate response. The amount of resources you deploy, the tactics you deploy, going into them, which is why there is a really strong argument to say that's why it's a lower number of high risk MISPers that come to harm, because actually we put so much into finding them so quickly. Conversely, if it is a low risk MISPer, it's the response is a lot slower, a lot more measured, a lot more pragmatic. The medium bit is the bit that I think needs some more work, because that time frame I think depends on some of the other factors that are and context that's live at the time, not just the missing person themselves.
Okay, Pepsi and Doritos is a question. Any correlation between early start of specialist investigations and good outcomes?
So I think there is. I think that links to the high risk element. Absolutely. Again, not part of this because this didn't look at, this was, as I said, that binary odds ratio between a risk factor and a harmful outcome. It doesn't look at the response, but yeah, my hypothesis would be it absolutely does, and that's why the percentage of high risk MISPers that come to harm is quite low.
I think even with the medium, and some of that is based on time. Some of forces have medium risk after a certain period of time. There is an investigative resource that looks at it, a specialist investigative resource, and that invariably does result in further actions, doesn't it? So it'd be a really good one to test. And
indeed, someone being raised to high as well. So you'll know, Mum, won't you? We ask the DI or the DCI to look at it. And they're saying, they've been missing for a couple of days now. Actually, we found out this. I think we need to up it.
Yeah, indeed. We got any further questions? Let me just have a look. Correlation? No.
think that might be it.
Okay, we've got passage of time will often see the initial medium assessment into harm. Did you look at those who sustained harm had been raised to high? So if it'd been raised to high, did you look?
So the categories that were based on this was at the category at the time of report, as opposed to the category at the time of closure, or if they changed MISPA category on that. So no is the short answer. It was done on what was known at the time of report and the initial assessment, as opposed to any ongoing assessment. There is an officer from Dorset, whose name escapes me now, which is terrible, who did a piece of research a couple of years before mine, who does a lot of that, and Quockvo as well from Thames Valley. Their research looks at this around that harm and length of time missing as well. So two really good pieces of research to look at there.
Alistair, do not apologise for your poor English. Okay, right. I think Viv makes a really good comment in the sidebar around exciting research. And I know you've missed it, but download it, because that's, absolutely the reason why we have it on the Society website. It is exciting, and I come back to the point. Every change that we do starts with somebody doing a piece of research, and then building on that research. And I think there is some building to be done on this, which allows us then to have those questions and discussions around, have we got our risk assessment right? We think we have, as it stands at best, what is our best guess as it stands at this time. But the more evidence that we can get around it, then the more we can refine, because it is all about continuous improvement. Viv has put a question up. Did you identify any outcomes or information regarding insufficient financial inquiries early in the investigation?
No. To be honest, I risk repeating myself, because we just did it on those sort of binary factors. But finance wasn't shown in recorded in compact at all. So that would be a really interesting thing to look at, to be honest.
Yeah. And any thoughts on challenging any anti-intellectual and anti-academic culture in police agencies? Okay.
Well, so my view is, and I'd like to think it's the view of most people on here, that evidence-based policing and trying to find what works, trying to find what doesn't work, is absolutely the best way forward. So you wouldn't take medication that hadn't been tested vigorously. You wouldn't go and stay at a hotel that you hadn't read the reviews to find out whether or not it was a decent hotel. So why would we take an approach to policing and something that touches so closely in people's lives, whether that's missing people, domestics, or any other area where people rely on us? Why would we not keep looking for evidence to see how we can do it better? And I think there's a responsibility on all of us as leaders and advocates of the EBP and in the service to kind of have that conversation and call people out on that.
I think you're right. I think policing is absolutely moving in the right direction in relation to this. I think my own force, but I think of many forces. I just had a meeting with the other Welsh forces only yesterday, and we were talking and we were sharing, doing a show and tell in terms of what we've got currently ongoing with academia to test lots of things. And actually it was a really good conversation. So I honestly do think that we're moving in the right direction. We absolutely want to get an evidence base for some of the things that we do. Some feels really intuitive. I think policing's a little bit impatient. We like things, and if we start to see something happening and working, we think, right, let's just jump on it and let's do it. But, we have been taught, and I think there's a lot of people and a lot of academics and, thanks to many universities who are really working alongside the police to try and get evidence-based so that what we do, we know works. And ultimately, that will also be open to challenge. And it's about that continuous improvement and that continuously working upon things. I think we are getting there. And I think that's, we've some way to go, but I think it's it's heading in the right direction. And if it wasn't, then we wouldn't have people on this interested in this seminar or interested in the Society of Evidence-Based Policing, which you can all be members of if you're not already. So it's fantastic. So Devon and Cornwall, particularly yourself, Ryan, should be praised for continuing great work around vulnerability issues, and I'm sure you can pass that on to your chief. And we've got there some awesome presentations and discussions shared with over 3,000 servant officers and around 16,000 potential recruits. Great work. More. What can I say?
Thank you very much.
If we've got no more questions, again, I apologise for our slight challenges that we had with the IT, but it hasn't detracted from the fab presentation from Ryan. It's not, it's really valuable, Ryan, that you put yourself out there and share your research. There'll always be people who want to knock, but, we really appreciate you coming today and doing this, because I think there will be lots of other people who will want to see if they can replicate what you find. And it might be that we tweak something differently or test something differently, but it's, certainly exciting work. Are you aware if your paper has come to the attention of the PNSC at the College of Policing who educate the Pulsar on missing persons? Do you know what? Yeah. I don't know. Has that come to the attention?
So a work in progress. So I have had conversations with NPCC lead, and yeah, we are. It's slowly burn, but yes, we are getting there.
Alistair, that's a really good point, because I was thinking during the presentation, there are things here. So we do, pulsars are brilliant, aren't they? They have got some criteria that they look at and they think, within so many distance of a given road or what have you. I think that there is some good crossover here, which will be really valuable. So I'm sure that those kind of discussions will take place in the near future. Really keen on building on this research. They are, Viv. Well, you've got Ryan's contacts, and if you haven't, Suzanne can make sure that you're in contact. We're all for building on any kind of research, so that's
absolutely
amazing.
More than happy for people to get in touch. Please do. It's ryan.doyle@devonandcornwall.pnn.police.uk.
So I will wrap up the presentation today and our the conference for today. Please join us on the weekly events. They really are interesting, and some things that you would never have thought would actually cross into your world is really important. So have a look at the podcasts, and thank you very much for your time today. God bless. See you soon.
Thanks very much. Take care.